Sorry, everybody.
Okay, so as I said, we got $9.1 million from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation through the Gulf Environmental Benefit Fund. And we are working in partnership with the Florida State Parks. They run the operational side, so they do the actual wetland clearing itself and own the equipment. And then we do project coordination and collect the science. So we do, I'll talk a little bit about that. We do vegetative transects to find out if what we're doing is having a positive effect. We were originally contracted to clear 220 acres. We've surpassed that and got an amendment to do some further work. And we are at now 304 acres. We're at 98% of our goal, which work is taking place right now, actually, to finish that up. It's gotten a little bit more difficult as the project's gone on because wet areas are very difficult to reach at this late stage, but we're still plugging along. We do have plans to move to Grayton Beach State Park, which has about 585 acres of wetlands that are in need of restoration. We have currently written a project for that and are seeking funding. You guys have several $1 million laying around. We could use it to help clear these wetlands. And then long term, we're looking also to finish up at Topside Hill Preserve. And we have had talks also with the Florida Forest Service about doing Point Washington State Forest. We have been able to leverage these funds and to do some other work out there. So we are actually studying how much this work is having an effect and what restoration actions are the best to use. So we go in and clear tie out of wetlands, but we are looking at different restoration techniques that that'll have an effect in which causes the wetlands to respond quicker. So that way we can share these results with other people who are doing projects that are similar. We're also looking at vegetation, hydrology, the amount of water that is available pre and post restoration, and soils and herps within the wetland to see the changes in restored versus unrestored areas. That'll be done next year. We're collecting very good data. We've collected a ton of data on that. And my colleague, Kelly Coles, is in charge of that. So if there's any interest in volunteering or finding out more, her email is at the bottom. So at Deer Lake, this is is that me?
Nope.
Oh, okay. This is an aerial from 1941 showing the wetlands. This is what we used initially to find out where some of these wet areas and wet prairies that we were interested in were. This is the earliest photographs that we have for that area. This was at the project beginning, so what it looked like when we started. And the yellow lines are the management zones that the park uses. Zooming in, this is one particular wetland, zone number 9. As you can see, in 1941, it was wide open, wet prairie, very little to no trees. The dark area in the middle is where the water pools into the creek and starts to flow out towards Deer Lake. This was it at the project start, choked in with hardwoods. So the state got the land in 1996. It was prior to this, it was St. Joe Paper Company land. And they managed it for silviculture and recreation and things like that they did out there. And wetlands and ecosystems weren't a priority in that. And so when the state got it, they started to return fire to these areas and burn, which became, they realized that they couldn't just burn these wetlands back into restoration due to a number of constraints, mostly, a lot of it has to do with wind direction when applying prescribed fire. As you know, South Walton is a very busy place, a lot of houses. We've been hemmed in on all sides by private development, and that makes prescribed burning difficult. And so they realized pretty early on that was not going to get the job done. And so this is what we've been able to do. We've opened it back up, much greater than it was. And it is a transformed landscape as a result of this project. Wide open, a lot of the stuff recovers by itself. We do have the ability to collect seeds and grow plants in Atlanta and return plants out there. And we have done that early on in the project, but for the most part, these areas recover on their own once you return sunlight and fire and back into the landscape. This is a view of what it would look like prior to clearing. That is almost all black tie. You notice there's hardly any ground cover, no herbaceous cover down low, and large tree trunks. And this is what it would look like after recovery. And it looks like this in several areas out there now where there used to be large tie trees and no sunlight. This is only several months after a burn too. So what we did was we mapped up all the wetlands around the park. That's what all these red and green lines are, and prioritized them. Some areas had wet prairie plants that were left over and were in okay shape, just being shaded out by the tie. Some were worse than others. And so we wanted to prioritize those areas that had plants that were still left in the seed bank. So they had the longest time to recover. But our process is we go in and mow the edges, the medium to small stuff, the green stuff in the background, that's tie. We'd mow that out of there. Then we come in with an excavator with a long reach, and we break off the larger tree trunks with that excavator. And then one of the keys is removing the biomass off the site because these are nutrient poor ecosystems. We get the biomass off the site. We were chipping it until the paper mill closed here in Panama City. That was kind of a pain anyways. It was expensive, and we had to sit on chips for a long time. So we have gone to now a method where we are piling them in specific areas and burning those piles when we do a prescribed burn. But this is one of our restoration areas here. You can see this is kind of a cross section. You can see the size of the trees. There's a creek down there just behind where the tractor's at, and these tie trees have grown up in some cases more than 80 years with no fire in there. And then we've done this from the same spot, looking down, we've cleared all that out. One important thing is that we are not using herbicide on this project, and that requires a great deal more attention to these areas as the hardwoods grow back, as they are apt to do. But we have utilized fire to help reduce the amount of tie in there. We are not trying to get rid of it. It is a native species. It is just out of balance, and so we're trying to help bring that balance back quicker. Fire will kill some of that off, and so we go back in and mow some of these areas and use all that to help carry the fire in cases where we don't have a fine fuel. So vegetation monitoring, we do twice a year. We check. We have transects all throughout the park where we check to see basically everything within a half meter square every 10 meters down the transect. So we can look at changes over time. So we did that prior to clearing, and we've done it twice a year since clearing. We track all the changes. So any mowing, any burning, anything that's happened in there, we track all that so we can see what effect all of that is happening. And there's some of the metrics that we collect. We have a very large data set, so we will actually be starting on that fairly soon as the project ends in 1 year, exactly. So some of the plants we're looking for, of course, our carnivorous plants, white top pitcher plants we have out there in great numbers. Very beautiful. This is their flower, in case anybody's unfamiliar, and the inside of the flower. We have parrot pitcher plants, known for their parrot-like beak and their interesting way of catching insects. They have a very dainty flower. Nice and red petals. Gulf Coast pitcher plant, the Sarracenia rosea, which is a pitfall basically with those downward facing hairs that'll trap insects in there. And then the beautiful rose colored petals on that, which makes it different from other purple pitcher plants throughout the range. Sarracenia flava, the trumpet pitcher plants, which are very numerous, you saw from the previous pictures. They are also varied in their color, known for their lime green flowers. Spoonleaf sundew, we have a lot of Drosera species out there. This is our only listed species of Drosera, of sundew. Traps insects on the leaf. These are their very tiny
flowers,
which are actually they're blooming right now. Saw some yesterday. Threadleaf sundews, very pretty in the late evening or early morning. They also trap insects on the leaf. That you can see those hairs with the dangerous dewdrops on the end. This is their flowers now. They just finished flowering. They flower through May. They're very pretty and very easy to see in the landscape. We also have butterworts, the Chapman's butterwort, which is a listed species. They look like tongues to me. They sunburn in the sun. They actually start out green, and then they turn red over time, kind of a red goldish. And that's their flower at the bottom right. Very early flower. They flower, along with this species, they flower in sometimes early to mid-February. They're one of the first flowers you see in some of these wetlands. But we collected some of the seeds of this one and replanted them out there. We have been very scattered in our plantings, but it's only because we didn't know what we needed early on. So we collected pitcher plants, we collected orchid seeds, some of these, and then grew them in the greenhouse in Atlanta. And then we realized that we were having a much better response, but we still had to put them out there. So we put them out in several places, and they've done pretty well. Large flower milkweed, very pretty milkweed that is actually also blooming right now. It's a great place to find beetles as well. Chapman's crownbeard, this is also a listed species, state listed as endangered. It is a rayless flower, and it has the leaves of it are rough like cat's tongues. Pine lilies, it is about to be pine lily season. One of my favorite times of the year. These are very pretty and last through the early part of August. We have some orchids as well. The coastal plain fragrant Pergonia, which is smells like vanilla. It's a ground orchid that we have. It is seen in about early May in some of the drier edges. Calopogon grass pinks. They are also in the spring, early spring. And I don't know if anybody's been out in the wetlands this year, but it has been a very, very good bloom year for everything. I don't know what our weather conditions were like coming out of the wintertime, but they were absolutely perfect because everything has been blooming like crazy. Yellow fringeless orchid, we don't have this one at Deer Lake. However, we were looking to try to possibly reintroduce it there. But this was found over at Topsail, which is just nearby at Deer Lake. And then this is the plant that basically started this entire project. When the state got the property in '96, they went out and did a land management review. John Benty and Eric Johnson went out there and found one of these in a small mow line next to a creek that was blooming. And that basically planted the seed that these wetlands were very special and needed restoration. And then it took them that entire time to be able to find money to be able to do that. But these are very pretty. We went from 1 to thousands. We have thousands along that creek now. And they are pollinated by hummingbird moths just after dark. You can see how bright that orchid is in the evening time. They have a proboscis that is long enough to reach the bottom of the spur, get close enough to get it. So I got that on a game camera. So that wraps me up. And if anybody has any questions, we'll take them at the end, or we'll take them now, or
we could take 1 or 2 questions now. We have time.
And then you can follow us if you have any want to find out anything further. We can visit our website, or we are also on Instagram for all of our work in the Southeast.
Yeah. I have a quick question. If that's good.
We've got 1 in the room, and then I'll jump to you, Ray. Okay.
Okay.
Would you have to maintain any kind of control after, or any kind of intervention be necessary after the project is over to maintain?
So the question is, will any sort of intervention be necessary after the project's over with? Ideally, no. What we've done is we've actually, this most recent amendment that we did, we extended for 2 years. And part of that was so that we could keep mowing and burning these areas. However, what we're seeing is, and our success basically on the project is that when we're done, the state who does 2 management actions, and they will always do these 2 things. They will get rid of exotic invasives, so they'll be spraying, and they'll always burn because they need to keep these lands burned because they have all these houses and everything else, and it's good for the land. So they will continue to burn these lands. So when we're done, they will only have to burn them on their regular schedule, which is we do it about every 2 years, and that will help. That will maintain those areas. I mean, some of the areas we cleared, we sort of did a reset down into the creek. And maybe fire doesn't get down there, and maybe it does. And that is what it is. But these open herbaceous edges, these wet prairies, they'll be maintained with just regular fire. And we've seen that so in the last 9 years.
Right. Oh, you're still on mute.
I always forget that. Thank you, Ryan. I was gonna ask, are you finding any, or what type of invasive species maybe are you finding through that area? Any Kogan grass, any torpedo grass, anything like that through the area?
Very little.
Good.
We've been very, very lucky at Deer Lake. There's been very little infestation. We have a couple areas of torpedo grass, a couple low water crossings, that they treat fairly regularly. And then we have some Chinese tallow trees that we've actually come across. And the big thing about what this project has done is that it has put a group of people, ourselves and the operational crew, into this, state park, into this wild area. And we have time, and that's what we do. So we can find all these, if there's any exotics and invasives out there, which is, like I said, been very little. The other thing that has led to is a lot of voucher species for South Walton, for Walton County. Because we were out there and we were able to collect these vouchers and see that these things occur out there. Like, we have the only occurrence of the Georgia fever tree in Walton County. It's not found really west of Jackson County. And so for it, one, to be that far south, and two, to be in Walton County, nobody had any idea. And so it's put eyes on the ground and allowed us to get this like real comprehensive coverage out there.
Melanie, and then we'll switch to Ray's presentation.
Yeah, just a quick question about, did you guys do the clearing in-house or did you contract it out? And if you contracted it out, who did the work?
No, we did it in-house. It was a very large project, but we bought all the equipment on the grant. And then the state of Florida, DEP, the Florida State Parks, they ran the operational side. So they hired the crew and bought the equipment. And so we've been very lucky that we've been able to do everything in-house and not had to contract anything out.
Thanks.
Sure.
All right, we will move on to Ray's presentation. If you have any questions that pop up for Jeff, you can put them in the chat and we'll have time after Ray finishes to kind of discuss other topics related to wetlands as well.
Thank you, Ryan. I'd like to pose a couple of questions before I start though. Anybody doing any mangrove survey work in the Panhandle? I think that is a no.
Yeah, I don't think I want to.
Well,
I want to get in on it.
What I'm going to talk about is, I mean, we haven't done anything since 2018, but we're getting ready to kind of revamp that this year, hopefully. One of the things, really not a question, but something to kind of keep in mind, and something that keeps coming up ever since we've done our survey is just speaking about invasive species. Even though mangroves are native plants technically to the south end of the state, would they be technically have invasive tendencies here for us? I have my own opinion of that, but just something to keep in mind. If there's a hot button topic with mangroves in the Panhandle, I feel like that's it. But let me, for bandwidth's sake, I'm going to stop my video for a little bit. And everybody can see my screen, all right?
Yeah.
All right, good deal. So yeah, I'm Ray Bodrey. I'm the Gulf County Extension Director. I'm originally from Georgia, so coming to the Panhandle and hearing that we had mangroves here was quite a shock. I went to a trainer session for Florida Master Naturalist instructor training for a brand new module called Coastal Shoreline Restoration. And the topic, for coastal shoreline restoration is shoreline restoration, oyster restoration, and mangrove restoration. And I kept thinking, well, what in the world are we going to do here in the Panhandle when it comes time for us to teach the field trip side of mangroves? Are we all going to get on a bus and head to South Florida? And at the time, Roz from Aner was sitting next to me, and she leaned over and whispered, "Ray, you have them in your county already." So Aner's been tracking mangroves in Gulf County and Franklin County for some time now. So that was quite a shock to me 10 years ago when I heard that. But in my opinion, back on the invasive side of things, that question, I mean, they're great with shoreline erosion. They're great habitat for just about all marine life, and they're awesome carbon sequesters. So I think they're just a big plus. For speaking from the standpoint of living here on St. Joseph Bay, or at least close to it. Okay, so let me break this down really quick about the contents of the presentation. Yeah, I'm going to do a little introduction of mangroves with a little help from the Florida Master Naturalist Program slides. I'll talk briefly about our 2018 survey that we did on mangroves and next steps. So the cool thing about mangroves, well, the really interesting thing about mangroves as they are, you're talking about 3 plants that are related really only because they're in the plant kingdom. They're all different genus and species. They're just all different individual type of plants, which is really interesting. So let's talk a little bit about mangrove ecology. So they're woody plants found in coastal and estuarine areas, tropical and subtropical regions. There's about 80 species worldwide, with 3 species here in Florida, and that's going to be a red mangrove, black mangrove, and a white mangrove. There is an associate that we'll talk about a little bit too. Adaptive, the great thing about mangroves too, if you have them in the bay and you need them in the bay for something like holding sediment down, holding soil down, is they're adapted to a range of salinity. They like highly organic, oxygenated, efficient soils too. So they'll just about, my point is they'll just about grow anywhere. And they have these really interesting propagules for seeds, and I'll go through those for each one of the plants. Now these mangroves, they can grow like 15 feet in average probably, and some of those in the southern end of the state will get 60 feet tall in areas. In this region of the state though, with our climate, they're more likely going to be scrubby kind of shrub plants instead of trees. A little bit about the distribution. So you're talking about latitude 25 south and 25 north. So that belt right across the map there is a good distribution line, found in 118 countries. So they're throughout the world. You can see it's kind of hard to see in that lower corner. This is an older illustration, but it's true to the most part, where mangrove expansion or growing mangrove forests, let's just put it to you that way, very populated areas of mangroves are we found them as far up as Cedar Key on the Gulf side. We found them, all the way up close to St. Augustine on the Atlantic side. Now, that's not to say that there's not pockets in other areas of the Panhandle. And I would wager, even if I was a betting man, I would say even north of St. Augustine, you may be starting to see mangroves at the state line of Georgia. It would not surprise me. Habitat loss is one of the main drivers. A lot of land development, land clearing in southern Florida on the coastline. Storm disturbances, storm events, the frequency of storm events, moving propagules around is definitely another reason of why we're seeing mangroves in the Panhandle. Again, there's going to be 3 different types of mangroves that I'm going to talk about, and the associate, and I'll kind of briefly go through those. Red mangrove is probably the one you're more familiar with. It has the red prop roots, kind of looks like War of the Worlds, that monster is the way I like to describe it. Black mangroves they don't have this type of prop roots. They grow closer to the ground, but they have these really neat nematophores. Think of cypress trees and how they have these cypress knees, Black mangroves have these nematophores that they use for gas exchange. And white mangroves, they're really just a shrubby plant that don't have prop roots and don't really have those kind of characteristics. And then the buttonwood, but you can see by this diagram here, you'll find the red mangroves mainly out in the water. You'll find some black mangroves at the high tide point, but mostly the black mangroves are going to be closer up on the shoreline, and then the white mangrove as well, and the buttonwood more at that interface where you get closer to the dunes, if there's in an area where there are dunes. So anyway, black mangroves, here's some really awesome shots of the nematophores there at the left picture. See those springing up, and they'll really cover some area too. You can see the white kind of velvety petal leaf there of the mangrove and the lima bean shaped propagule. Pay close attention to these propagules that I'll show you on these slides. They're really neat how each type of mangrove has their different type of propagule. But with the black mangrove, you'll find they're more lima bean shaped. A little bit about the black mangrove too, just hitting the kind of the high points again. That you find them farther up on land, but in salt pans mainly, in depression areas, and some on the shoreline, not as much out in the water. Great stabilizers of soil, and again, they're going to be more shrubby kind of plants here, especially in the Panhandle. A little bit about the ecology. They're blooming now, and they'll bloom until, yeah, probably another month or so. I kid with the beekeepers a little bit around here because it could be a potential niche crop here in the Panhandle. You know, mangrove honey and the Keys is a really nice niche crop, and it would time perfectly with our Tupelo season because Tupelo would end and mangrove honey season would start right after that. Anyway, just foreseeing the future possibly. But anyway, lima green bean shaped propagules, yeah, roughly about 1 inch in size when they're mature. It takes about 14 days for them to stratify in the bay, for them to be able to germinate. But about 14 days for those. Red mangroves, like I said, probably the mangrove you've seen more of with the prop roots on the left-hand side there. You can see in the top picture, there's those green bean-shaped propagules the red mangrove has. And you can see the petals of the flowers are much different than the black mangrove. So here are 3 pictures of red mangroves. So I have a client out on the Cape. So of course, this is the Gulf side. This is, if you're familiar with the bay here in St. Joe Bay, this is relatively closer to the Pig Island area. But she's an active kayaker, and she took these pictures of these red mangroves. These pictures were taken over the last fall. So, pretty neat. So yeah, the red mangroves, again, prop roots is the main thing that probably the easiest way to identify those. It's a great habitat for fish too, kind of gives them a little camouflage, a little cover from predators as well. Yeah. A little bit about the production. Again, propagules are going to be these elongated bean-shaped propagules. It takes about 40 days in salt water for them to germinate, but they have a long viability of around a year. So they can hang around the surf. They can hang around in an area before they find a spot to start to grow and substrate. Let me talk about the white mangrove, but just so you know a little bit about the white mangrove, because you're not going to see this one in the Panhandle. The white mangrove does not fare well with freezing temperatures, even really cooler temperatures. If we're talking lower 40s, upper 30s, the white mangrove is going to really struggle, if not die. The black mangrove is the most cold hardy mangrove, with the red being following in their second. But we've found some areas where we've lost red mangroves over the past couple of years with those. You know, a couple of years ago during December, we had about 3 days of temperatures where it landed somewhere around 17 degrees at one point here and there. So we lost some red mangroves due to it. But surprisingly, the black mangroves that I'm kind of tracking a little bit fared well. White mangroves, not going to do so well during cold temperatures. You're just not going to see them in this area. But just to show you another angle of what a white mangrove is compared to the other 2 mangroves and how they're all 3 are just so different in the way their structures are and just the characteristics of the plants. White mangroves, again, are going to grow further upland. They don't have any visible aerial roots, and they excrete salt through their leaves. They have these little nectar areas. You can see it in the photo with the round red circles there. showing those nectar locations where they secrete a sugary substance that the bees love. Back on beekeeping again. Again, they're the least cold tolerant species, and you're just not going to see them in the area. But just a little bit more information about it. Something that's very interesting about the plants is they could be hermaphroditic, or they could be just male plants, which is really interesting. Can be pollinated, self-pollinated, or through insects, as well as the other two mangroves can as well. The propagules, again, are different than the other two plants. These are more kind of contact lens shaped propagules. And they rely on about 8 days, of water to kind of complete the germination process and be stratified. Well, this is the buttonwood, so the mangrove associate is what we affectionately refer to this plant as. You'll see it growing tandem with white mangroves, and every once in a while with black mangroves. And it's kind of at that transitional point too in the landscape. You can see how they could be mistaken for mangroves, for maybe a white mangrove because of the leaf structure, and they have similar petioles on the stem there of the leaf for sugar excretion. They flower year round. They have these drupes that you see in the picture to the right. They're a popular seaside ornamental tree down in South Florida. Here you can see the picture to the left there. At that stage, just by seeing the fruiting bodies there, it looks a lot like buttonbush, one of our native plants in the region, well, throughout the state actually, but it's not. This is actually a buttonwood, so a little different. But I wanted to show you a handful of slides there just to kind of start the process of kind of giving an introduction about mangroves and what you would see here in the Panhandle and what you wouldn't see. So black mangrove is definitely by far the dominant mangrove that you're going to find here just because of climate. I want to switch gears. I've got a few slides to talk about the actual survey that we did in 2018. And what I did was basically just took the lightning round talk that I gave at the Bays and Bayous Symposium back in 2020. I thought this would be a good few slides to give you an idea about the survey and about how we did things. And it all started with a Sea Grant professor and his grad student. And they had heard about pockets of mangroves in Louisiana and Mississippi and potentially in Florida. So they wanted to get together and put a baseline of what the population may look like through these areas. So with a concerted effort, we us Sea Grant agents here in the Panhandle, as well as Sea Grant agents and DEP personnel in Alabama and Mississippi, got together and put basically a siting network together. And we tried to map areas where we thought there would be good spots, where there would be where we either knew there were mangroves there, or just spots in general that we felt like it was a good idea to survey the area for mangroves anyway. So this started from Wakulla County, Florida, all the way to the state line of Louisiana and Mississippi. So you can see by that author list, there were a number of us. A little bit about the purpose and the methods of it. This wasn't a grant-funded project. This is just something we got together and put together a survey of materials that would be needed and a methodology. And really, it was all about recruiting volunteers and teaching them how to ID. That was the hardest part, probably, because there are so many plants out there that may mimic what a mangrove seedling may look like. But also was to train the volunteers on the process, and I'll show you that in the next slide. But the way this worked was we would train volunteers. They would select 10 transect areas where they would run 100-meter transects. And they would GPS these so that we would be able to track them, of course, in later years. I did it a little differently in golf. I knew where there were some areas, cluster areas, throughout the bay of black mangroves. And I had an intern one summer, the summer of 2018, before the hurricane, from UF that pled with me, please, please, Mr. Bodrey, I don't want to be stuck in an office doing clerical work. Give me a GPS unit and I'll go map all the mangroves that I can find. I've got a kayak, so I let her do that. She spent a couple of months, and after a couple of months, she mapped 188 black mangroves in St. Joseph Bay. Pretty impressive. So that was our kind of our claim to fame with this project, because most of the mangroves were mapped for Gulf County in this project. But you can see by some of the pictures here, the top two pictures and the one on the side there are little red mangrove seedlings from Escambia County. Then you can see in the map there where Mississippi had some mangroves found as well. A little bit about the survey. So basically we had a smartphone app, iNaturalist, that we utilize to record data. There's a mangrove, I think it's still on there, a mangrove sighting network area in iNaturalist for mangroves for the Panhandle, and well, for this whole project, technically. There's a data sheet, paper data sheet supplied as well. Any necessary permits, so we ended up not needing any. Depended on your area though. Needed a camera or phone with a camera, be able to take GPS units, tape measure, a meter stick, be able to somehow measure a quad. And none of us used the surveying equipment like the RTK. We just didn't need that, but that was something that was on the survey material list that you could use. And here's just a snapshot of a data sheet. And across the top, you see 5, 6, 7, 8, and that's just the plants being numbered 5, 6, 7, 8. Taxonomy, whether it's black or red mangrove, whether it be seed seeds or seedlings around those plants, of course, the longitude and latitude, a couple of pictures, tree height, and then 2 important measurements, the canopy distance, crown diameter. Crown diameter 1 is measured from the top of the plant, more or less parallel the top side of the plant, and then crown density 2 is really the height of the plant. And whether or not there was any herbivory going on with the plant, whether or not it had aerial roots, and so on and so on, and how far it was from the plant was from the shoreline. So this is the kind of data set that we collected. Out of that, the results, here's some information on this. Like you can see some pictures of GIS data that we have. We ended up having over 30 participating volunteers for the study, and over 500 mangrove plants were recorded over a 3-year period. And I should put an asterisk by this. We were designing this project to last 3 years. You would map mangroves for 3 years in a row. But some of these counties or some of these entities only did it for 1 year or only did it for 2 years. Anyway, in survey efforts, we plan obviously to continue that. But you can see in the top right-hand corner, the black mangrove density on St. Joe Bay. So that's right outside of the Buffer Preserve Lodge, if you're familiar with that area of St. Joe Bay. And that's the easiest spot to get to if you wanted to walk to see the mangroves in that area. And that's where most of that 188 were mapped. There's some other little pockets around the bay, but that's mostly where the concentration of the black mangroves are. You can see in the lower picture as well. There's some data in here from Ainer where they were mapped over in Dog Island and then on St. George as well. As far as next steps, I'm looking to start another survey in the fall. Probably change the data sheet a little bit. I'm really more interested in distribution than anything. But I'd like to do it during the fall. It's just a little bit cooler for the volunteers. Maybe do a month-long survey effort. I have master gardener volunteers that are super interested in doing so. I'm hoping to get some volunteers from the Friends Group of the Buffer Preserve to do so. I'd certainly welcome any volunteers or any other agencies that would like to partner on this effort. It would be awesome. I can tell you also with this program that we had, the survey program that we had, there were a handful of mangroves mapped in the Scambia. There were a few found in Bay, off of Tyndall, close, if in vicinity of Crooked Island. We found a few. Like I said, like you can see in the map too, we had a few pockets that were found in Franklin County, but by and large, Gulf County had the most mapped mangroves. But I'd be willing to work with other counties as well. But that's really where we are. I'm trying to kind of formulate training for the fall, maybe early fall. That way we can get some volunteers maybe to go out October or November or something like that, when it's a little bit cooler and a little bit easier to get around the bay after scallop season. But yeah, so there we go. Thank you guys. If I can answer any questions or talk any dialogue, let's do so, please.
Thank you. Melanie?
Yeah, where in Tyndall was it? Wild Goose Lagoon? Do you remember?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, where on Tyndall was it? Was it Wild Goose Lagoon?
I can tell you where, I'm not familiar with the area. As
Okay,
far as
it was in the Sound, right?
It was in the Sound, yes.
Okay, yeah, because we had known about two black mangrove that were pre-storm, so pre-2018. So I was just curious how many were there now.
I'm not sure if we found black. I want to say we found red mangroves.
Okay, okay.
So I'll have to touch base with Scott on that at Bay County because he participated in the survey. But I want to say it may have been a couple of blacks along with the list too. But I wanted to say it was a handful of reds that we had found there.
Okay. Yeah, I'd love to know the location and how many if you could get that to me.
Sure.
Ray, would that be in the iNaturalist thing?
Yes, it should be. Yeah, with the mangrove sighting network,
Okay.
should be a tag.
I'll see if I can find it.
And I can tell you, Caitlin at Aigner has a nice data set. She has our data set along with her data set, and I wouldn't be surprised if she had more counties. Because I know they're tracking on it as well, and haven't spoken to Caitlin in a while, but yeah.
Meg?
So two things. To start, I'll get in touch with you. We have, as far as I know, there's an ongoing mapping effort going on here in some of our barrier islands in Franklin County. So Kate Snyder, as he mentioned, kind of started that, and our stewardship section is actively working to map some of the ongoing mangrove establishments. So I'll
Nice.
pass some of that info along. But also I had a question. This was a concern raised. So I know there's a lot of positive aspects of mangroves and their sediment retention and shoreline protection. But in another talk about mangroves I attended, somebody brought up the concern that if we have kind of this replacement of salt marsh habitat by mangroves, and then we get some sort of adverse event like a freeze that wipes them out, has there been any discussion of kind of the negatives of mangroves taking over these traditionally salt marsh habitats and its effects on coastal erosion, habitat loss, things like that?
No, I'm not privy to any research in that area, but I can see where there would be a concern with that. This is all really new to us. Frankly, we need more research opportunities here for mangrove expansion, and to tackle some of those kind of issues and even, model some of those scenarios. So we get a better picture of what you're talking about. Yeah.
So there's a question in the chat kind of related, about are mangroves establishing in salt marsh areas or more open shore habitat in the surveys that you did?
One second.
I'm sorry. Did
I
we
would
lose-
say, I'm here, can you hear me?
Yep,
Okay, yeah, I would say more so we're finding them in shore habitat. You know, we're finding, and the area around the buffer preserve that I showed in the presentation where the majority of the mangroves are mapped, I affectionately call that area our mangrove prairie. Because there's much of that area that is, I mean, relatively, there's no tidal action in there. You know, it's more of a salt marsh kind of area, drier land. Open shore, not seeing a lot. Now on the inner side, in between Pig Island and the inner side of Cape, there is an area, and I haven't been through there with a kayak in a while. Sometime it's been years, and I haven't heard anything in contrary, but there were several red mangroves there in that area that were out in the water a good bit. I mean, they were, you know, at low tide, they were probably in a couple of feet of water. And large mangroves had been there for a while, had a nice buffer, storm buffer where they were, and probably temperature buffer there for them a little bit, which caused them to be able to grow the size that they were, because they were, you know, probably 4 foot tall, maybe 5 foot tall, and have very pronounced red prop roots. A lot of the prop roots that you see on these red mangroves around the bay in these little pockets, they're not, you saw probably in the presentation, they weren't very red. They were more of a brownish color, but I can remember these 2 or 3 mangroves had a very, very, very red prop roots. And but I don't know how they've fared since I haven't been through that area. I don't know how they've fared since the freezes that we've had over the last couple of years.
Hey, so Ray, I've got a similar question, which I ask this every time I hear a talk on this topic, which is, are there any concerns or studies looking into could the mangroves replace the salt marsh? And then, you know, if we get a couple of years of cold and they beat back the mangroves and then there's no marsh there, you know, is this a resilience issue in terms of our coastal communities? So it sounds like they may be competing in the same general area. Is there any kind of studies that you're aware of that may be looking into that question?
Not at this point that I know of for the Panhandle, for sure. The only research study that I know of that we've had on mangroves has been whether or not it was a genetic study on whether or not a certain subvariety of black mangrove from South Florida could live in St. Joe Bay. And we had a professor from Florida State at the time. She's at Northeastern now, I think. And she had a test plot not far from the buffer preserve. And I don't know, planted maybe 40 or 50 mangroves. And they at first did not seem to make it. They went dormant. I thought many of them had died, and I think she did too. Time went on, they bounced back, and the last time I was through that area, I would say half of the mangroves are living. And you can tell this spot, you can see it, you know, from the water. You can see it easily see it from the little mangrove prairie there, because there are PVC stops in the grass, sticks in the ground, marking these areas where the mangroves are planted. But no, I think we just need more research on that. They're, they're great, like we were talking about, they're great at, holding down, sediment. They're really great for that. Could help us with some erosion issues that we have around the bay when it comes to land clearing. But the other side of that coin is, what are they competing with? Yeah.
There are other if mangroves come in large-ish numbers, are there other species that will be displaced? Fish, birds, I don't know, what else could be affected if salt marshes recede and mangroves advance?
A good question. And I'm sorry, it's getting a little choppy. Can you hold on, give me 1 second. Give me 1 second.
So it was.
I'm sorry, can you repeat your question one more time? My audio is coming up and down.
Sure,
Kind of
I'm
choppy.
not phrasing it correctly, but if mangroves grew in larger numbers and displace salt marsh, what other species, fish, birds, I'm not sure what other species may well be affected?
Would be affected by the,
By the presence of the mangroves. In other words, would some species not be there anymore and they would be replaced by other species, whether it be fish or birds? I don't know what might be affected, but that it seems to me that that's a possibility.
that would be a possibility, I would think. Again, that's another, I think, topic of research there that needs to be done. In the Panhandle, if it's not, there may be journals for that, in South Florida and areas. But I don't know that I can answer that question. I don't know what the competition would be like, between species, if that were to be the case, if mangroves were to take over an area.
Yeah, I know, previously when I worked on mangrove stuff, a lot of people were to explore that question of what's the trade-off of, particularly for fish species, like salt marsh versus mangrove. I just haven't been in that world as much, so I don't know what the literature says right now, but I do know people are definitely thinking about it, yeah. And I think probably same thing along the lines of the question that both like Meg and Daryl proposed. And I know that at least talking with some of the USGS folks, there is interest in kind of getting some more wetland research going in St. Joe Bay, hopefully in St. Andrews too. And so there's Mike Osland at the Wetland Center with USGS does a lot of really great work, and he's done a lot of kind of the work that shows what the break points are for where black mangroves survive, what they need, et cetera, et cetera. So I think hopefully there will be some more research in our areas, in the Panhandle specifically, in the coming years, which will be great.
Yeah, I think what we need now, more than anything, is to track the distribution. Because we don't have a clear picture of that, since it's been 2018, who knows, in some of these pockets, they may not be there anymore, or it'd be great to see, whether or not they're surviving, especially since we've had these 2 significant winters where we've had some pretty cool temperatures, and we've gone, 10 years prior to that, where we've had some really mild temperatures that have been perfect for mangroves to settle in and grow. So yeah, that's kind of the next step. I think we just need more data. We know they're here. We just need more data.
Would this be a proposal? I mean, do y'all have a funding source that could do that, or is this a proposal that we maybe need to work together to try to get funding for that research?
I'd love to, yeah, I don't have any irons in the fire as far as funding for something like this. Right now, it'd be just sort of grassroots kind of extension. More or less, more baseline information about distribution of mangroves in the bay. But I would love to tackle, the topic deeper, no doubt. I'd be glad to work with you or anyone that would be interested on the panel here, doing some more significant research with mangroves.
So Ryan, you're
Yeah.
gonna have the Florida Coastal Management Program there on Friday.
Yeah,
This might be a great question for Tiffany and Holly.
I won't be there. I have to go to Pensacola.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm gonna see them at their meeting here
Okay,
and no, I'm not. I'm gonna shoot them an email right now because I'll forget and just say, hey, got thinking about something and see and get their reaction on it.
yeah,
Because they've got
Nice.
that annual funding that we could tap to maybe do that kind of research.
yeah. Agreed. And Ray, I would love to partner on whatever makes sense, so we can talk
Cool.
more after this.
Okay. Thanks, Ryan. No doubt.
Yeah.
Hey, Ray, you mentioned that they have a pretty wide range of salinity tolerances. Do they get into areas that are significantly brackish? And do these prop root systems ever host oysters?
They do. I can answer that second question. They do. They're an excellent substrate for bivalves. So yeah, that would work. That would be a great habitat for shellfish. As the other question, yes, I've seen mangroves survive areas. Now, temporary salinity changes in the bay, where an area where it may drop, to 10, I'm just anecdotally speaking here, maybe say around 10 parts per million or around that, for a few months, like during a rainy season from say June to September, July to September. Just speaking of scallop data that we have in those areas, mangroves are in those areas as well. So I don't think there would be much of a disruption, if in growth and overall mangrove health in those areas. But if it's an area that's inundated with basically fresh water, or it changes where a stormwater drain's put in somewhere and you've got just an inundation of fresh water constantly, I don't think the mangroves would fare very well with that kind of scenario. But if they're just kind of blips on the radar where they're getting a pulse of fresh water, significant fresh water over a certain month, over a few months of the year or more, I don't think that would affect them.
Yeah, I was thinking specifically about areas where oysters have historically been healthy and making bars, and whether or not these are places also where we might anticipate mangroves, and whether or not that's a known association.
Right. Yes.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
All right, we're gonna start to wrap up this portion of the meeting. Are there any last questions for Jeff or Ray? Okay, well, let's give a virtual round of applause and in-person round of applause for Jeff and Ray. Thank you for taking your time to join us today, and I'm sure we will be talking with both of you about how to continue and support the work that y'all are doing. So thank you again.
Thank you.
We just have a few more things to get through today. Let's see. But we wanted to just give you a really brief update on the state of the watershed, since we were talking about it pretty heavily in the beginning of the year. And part of this grant funding and this project was funding a new staff scientist position. And so we're happy to say that we finally have a staff scientist on board. So Rose is here in the room. She's waving online if you can see, and she just joined the team in May and has really kind of hit the ground running as it comes to the state of the watershed. And that's really going to be her focus for this first year of her being here with the estuary program. So welcome to Rose. You'll be seeing a lot more of her and hearing a lot more from her in future meetings. But just a reminder, the state of the watershed we're working on, it's really kind of giving us that status update of where all of these different indicators lie. We spent an early January and February meeting kind of narrowing down what indicators and metrics we're going to use. I did not update this slide. This is just an example. And so Rose has been hard at work pulling all the data that we need to be able to analyze and look at and come up with the status and trend for these various indicators and metrics. So kind of where we are at, we just wanted to give you a brief update of where we're at. Again, Rose has really done a great job acquiring a lot of the data and standardizing it, just kind of checking to make sure that it's all in place, what we need. We found a few data gaps, and so we'll be able to write about things like that in the report and share more information on our next meeting when we have stuff worked up just a bit more. But again, this is the detail of all of the different metrics that we ended up selecting. So we are trying to cover a lot, and really all just for sake of size, all we're showing here are things related to water quality, natural resources and species conservation, and then resiliency. So there will be there's a whole nother group, stewardship, that's not included here. And that's really because the committee wanted to really focus on the indicators that the committee was most interested in. So we're working through the stewardship ones on our own and with the Community Action Committee as we can. So just a reminder of kind of the different steps of this project and what we've done already and where we're at. So again, we kind of had our indicator and metric selection before Rose started back in January, February. We kind of reviewed existing frameworks based on other people's report cards and sort of state of the watershed or state of the bay reports, and kind of selected some of the things that we liked, color coding, we liked the trends. We liked having the map. We've hired Rose in May, she started, and then we've been acquiring data and standardizing it and identifying data gaps most recently. So now we're transitioning to really identifying what our thresholds will be for all these different indicators and metrics, conducting analyses, and then starting to put together kind of very drafty looks at what those final products will be, which is a report and then an interactive dashboard where you can kind of zoom around and look at the data a little more closely. So all of this is still on track for November 2024 completion date. So we will have another update for you possibly in July or August. So that is where we're at with the state of the watershed. Any questions there? And a big thank you to all of our partners who have sent us data that we have requested, worked with us to maybe help standardize it or clip it to our area instead of just having to download the whole state of Florida. It really makes it a lot easier for us, and we really appreciate you guys taking the time to help us out with that. So last couple of things are just group announcements. The estuary program will be at a couple of events. We will be at the Forgotten Coast Sea Turtle Festival. We've heard it's a really awesome event, so please go check it out. There will be a lot of other organizations there as well. That's on Sunday, June 30th. We'll also be at the City of Panama City's Salute to Freedom Festival on July 4th. And then one other thing we wanted to kind of highlight is a sea urchin survey that we just kind of created using survey 123. We've kind of heard reports of more urchins than maybe people have noticed in the past around St. Andrew, the aquatic preserve in St. Andrew Bay. And so we thought, why not try and get some information from folks who are out on the water, and anyone can submit these. You don't just have to be boating in St. Andrew Bay. Happy to have documentation over from St. Joe too, especially because that's really where the urchins were the biggest problem most recently. But feel free to share this. I can send you the flyer itself and the link itself if that would be easier. But just wanted to highlight these couple of events and then open the floor to anyone else that would like to share any upcoming events that are happening that folks can attend or should know about.
How serious is this sea turtle festival? Because the look on that turtle's face seems like it's really serious.
You know, I don't know. I have never been.
That's certainly St. Joe.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
The Sea Turtle Festival is amazing, and it's outdoors in a beautiful place right there in the renovated park, right in the heart of St. Joe. It's well worth going, and there'll be lots and lots of booths from various community groups.
It really is a great park.
Yeah.
It really is great.
Yeah.
It's big.
All right. If you have any announcements that you think of, throw them in the chat or feel free to jump off mute. The one last thing we wanted to touch base on is future meetings. So we have some field work in July. I know a lot of other people are busy doing field work, so we are toying with very highly likely postponing the July meeting and just sending out some state of the watershed material for review. Any yays or nays on that? Thumbs up on postponing, thumbs down? Where are people at? I know July is a busy month in general.
I think whatever helps y'all the most. So it sounds like the document review might be a good, productive use of that time. And welcome aboard, by the way. Sorry, we should have said that when they introduced you, Rose.
All right, great. Well, I will let you know what we end up doing. But we will probably postpone the in-person meeting and just send out some material for review. And on that note, I had a really great meeting with one of our committee members for some ideas for guest presentations. And so if you have ideas of what you would like to see, please reach out, let me know. Even if it can't happen during like a science and technical committee scheduled meeting. We've had really great feedback from our seagrass presentations, and I think there's a lot of interest, not just from our committee, but from a much broader group, and I'm happy to help kind of facilitate a off meeting time presentation, sort of webinar style schedule type thing, if that's of interest. So always looking for ideas, so send them my way.
And just want to say, these have been great. Every one of them learn a lot, and it's great to see what's going on. So appreciate the speakers speaking.
Yeah. I don't want to, got to balance the asking everyone to present all the time with other stuff.
Right.
So I'm trying to do it in a way where it doesn't just feel like we're only asking people to share, to present.
And that's why in July we'll be reviewing,
yeah,
draft materials. So it's a good mix.
Yeah, great. All right, well, that is really all we have to go over today. So last minute, in case anyone has thought of any announcements to share, shout them out. All right, that's it. We will adjourn a little bit early.
Thanks, everybody. Great meeting.
Thank you again.
Thanks,
for taking
everybody.
to present. TRH 24.